Hey guys, Titan Apprentice, welcome back to the channel. Today's video we are still on a Great Depression kick, so we are talking about 10 tips to help get you through the next Great Depression. Now someone's going to ask, so what is the difference between a tip and a skill? A tip is something that anyone can do. You don't need experience, you don't need knowledge, you just need to know about the tip and then do it. A skill, on the other hand, is something that you have to practice with, you have to work on, you have to continuously be learning and be improving yourself to make that skill better. So let's kick it off with number 1. Use it up, wear it out, make do, or do without. This was the motto for the first Great Depression. They didn't have money to buy new clothes, new furniture, new outfits, new tractors, new cars. They had what they had, and they had to deal with it. And so it didn't matter if your clothes got a hole in them, you mended them. It didn't matter if your shoes got a hole in them, you mended those. It didn't matter if your tractor broke down, you found a way to fix it because you didn't have money to buy a new one. I know nowadays we live in a throwaway economy. If something breaks, it's cheaper to buy a new one than to fix the one you already have. Back then, that wasn't the case. And if you ain't got money to replace what you have, you best find a way to fix it. Tip number 2. You must learn how to adapt. Improvise, adapt, and overcome. That is the motto of the U.S. military. Every situation is going to be different. If we go from how we're living now, right? We got cars, we got gas, we've got electricity, we've got all this fancy stuff that they didn't have 100 years ago, to a new Great Depression where you're not working, so you can't buy the new car, you can't buy the new clothes, your cell phone no longer works, you no longer have power in your house. You're going to have to learn to adapt to your environment. And it could be adapting day to day, it could be adapting year to year, month to month. Summertime and wintertime are absolutely different. You might adapt and adjust for the summer just in time for fall to get here. But you have to learn how to adapt, and to adapt properly. If we go from eating 3 hot meals a day to eating 1 hot meal a day, well, it's going to take your body time to adjust to that. Same way with anything else in this world. Learn to adapt. Tip number 3. Appreciate and enjoy the little things in life. I work with a lot of older folks, and while they might not have lived through the Great Depression, either their parents or grandparents did. And so growing up, they had experiences that I didn't have. And we'll sit down and we'll get to talking about them, and they'll tell me how at Christmas they might have gotten a ball glove, and then their brother or sister got the ball, and then the other brother got the baseball bat, because they didn't have money to spend to get everyone a new ball glove, so they had to share. The fruit that we get at Christmas time, that was a tradition from the Great Depression. Parents would save up money to buy an orange, to buy bananas, to buy these things that you wouldn't see all year, but you might see them at Christmas time. Just having the family over and having food on the table is something that even nowadays not a lot of people get to do. Whether that's because you live across country or whether that's because you can't afford the food to put on your table, enjoy the little things in life. Tip number 4. Reuse everything until you can't reuse it no more. One good example of this is the coffee and the tea bags from the Great Depression. I think of how we make coffee at my work now. You put some coffee in the basket, you put the basket in the pot, pour the water over it, and when it's done, you throw the basket out, right? The basket with all the coffee grounds in it. Back then, they didn't do that. Because again, the more money you spend on those things, the less money you have for firewood, for your tractor, for your family, for putting food on the table. So let's say they made a pot of coffee, they would reuse those grounds over and over and over and over again. So your fresh cup of coffee at the beginning of the day was amazing. Then by the end of the day, you're using the exact same coffee grounds, and by the 4th or 5th pot, by now it's just dirt water. And they would do the same thing with the tea bags. There's a lot of stories coming out from that period where people would make a cup of tea, and they would put the tea bags on the counter and let them dry. And they'd use those same tea bags later on in the day, and then they'd put them on the counter and let them dry. They might do it 3 or 4 or 5 times over, but every penny saved was one more penny going to the pot. That A little bit of coffee might not seem like much. That extra tea bag per day might not seem like much until it is. It adds up very, very quick. Number 5, and this might not apply as much today, nothing is truly trash. Now, back in the day, they would get potatoes in these burlap sacks. That burlap sack could be used for mending clothes. It could be made into a dress for your little daughters. And the potato sack company learned this. So they started putting designs and pretty little flowers and all these different designs on these dresses. So the girls that were wearing these potato sack dresses, it wasn't just a brown bag with potatoes written on it. It had little flowers, made it look a little cute. But that was something that most people would have considered trash. And it was trash up until the 1929, 1930s, 1935, right? 1920s, they were probably throwing them out. But 1929, when the Great Depression started, that is when that no longer became trash. Now, nowadays, we get a lot of plastic. Plastic's not that good, but you can use that plastic for something. We get a lot of cardboard boxes. You can use those cardboard boxes for something. Even if it's just putting it in your compost pile, that is something else that you can use that for. The plastic, if it's a plastic bottle, you can make a rain catchment out of it. Yeah, it's only 2 liters or a gallon, but that's 1 more gallon than what you had. If we have another Great Depression, don't be so keen on throwing things away. See if you can reuse them, recycle them, or upcycle them. That's a big thing nowadays, is people taking old things that people are throwing away, throwing a new coat of paint on it, fixing some screws on a dresser, and then reselling it. Tip number 6. Use the entire family. Nowadays, kids don't work. Right? Maybe they'll help out in the garden a little bit. Maybe they'll, go pick out some dandelions or something. But they don't actually hold jobs. Back in the day, there wasn't really child labor laws. So if you could find a plant that not only would hire the dad and the mom and the little brother and the little sister and grandma and grandpa, well shoot, that's 5-6 people in your house that are working. Everyone's making an income. The entire family would come together in one house and live and support that house. I think about it now, I've got in-laws, I've got my dad, I got my mom, we're all paying different house bills, house payments. What if we all came together? We pooled our resources. Yeah, it would be rough living with my parents and her parents, my wife's parents, and my wife and the kids, but this household would make a lot of money. This household in itself, we would have a lot of laundry, but we could all support one another. And that's what people did back then. If the kids couldn't work in a factory, or if the kids couldn't work for a neighbor or whatever, they went chopping wood. They went picking dandelions. They went picking onions. They went to the woods and found acorns. Whatever it meant for the next meal. Whatever it meant to support the house. And that's what people need to understand. We live in such a spread out environment now. You got people that live in California and their parents are in the Carolinas. Well, if Great Depression happens, are you going to be able to support yourself, or are you going to have to move back home with mom and daddy? Tip number 7. Leftovers stayed on the stove. Back then, a lot of people didn't have refrigeration or a way to freeze things. So what they would do is they would cook a meal for breakfast. And whatever wasn't ate basically went in a pot. And they got to eat it for lunch. And then if there was still leftovers, they got to eat for dinner. And if it was there the next day, guess what? It was getting eaten. There wasn't a thing such as leftovers. And it wasn't, hey, let me put my leftovers in the fridge and forget about them for a couple days and then throw them away. You don't waste food during a Great Depression. They would keep that pot always going. So if they had some meat from their breakfast, or maybe they'll pour some soup mix in it, or make it their own homemade soup and use that meat that was left over from breakfast. Or maybe that meat was 2-3 days ago and they're using it to make a soup now. And they just start throwing things in it. Dandelions, wild onions from the garden, maybe some acorns that they cooked up, whatever they could find, whatever they could get their hands on, went in this pot. It wasn't done until every single bit of that food was ate. And then you did it again the next day or the next week. There was no such thing as throwing away your leftovers, because most people didn't have leftovers, because most of the leftovers went in a big pot that stayed on the stove all day. Tip number 8. Speaking of things going in pots and making another meal. Save everything you possibly can. If you have a chicken and you harvest all the meat off of it, those bones are still good. I don't plan on eating the bones, but you can make a bone broth if you boil the bones. Any leftovers go in this pot. The bacon grease, the grease from your bacon got saved. Everything got saved for a use at a later date. Nowadays, we cook everything in bacon grease. Eggs, cornbread, whatever, you name it. But that really all started way back then. Because that bacon grease was fat. It was calories. And it was also a way that you didn't have to buy Crisco or butter or whatever they had back then to make your meals. Tip number 9. It is okay to be uncomfortable / sleep cold. My dad was the world's worst about sleeping cold when I was growing up. I remember going to his house and it being wintertime and he shuts the heat off. You wake up and you can see your breath. Now you slept warm because you had 3 or 4 or 5 blankets on the bed, or you had a sleeping bag on the bed. But he would walk around the house in his long johns. And I always thought that was crazy. But then I understand it. The more money you spend heating your home when you're under 3, 4, 5 blankets, that's more money down the drain. That's more money going to someone else. If you can sleep cold and pile an extra blanket or 2 on the bed, if you can sleep cold and sleep in the same room as someone else, if you can be just a little bit uncomfortable, it can save you money. Now again, you lose your job, your hours get cut, that little bit of savings goes a long way. Now I'm not recommending it, but I saw on TikTok, one guy, his heat bill last winter was $22. And everyone was like, oh no, that's fake, it's made up. And he showed how he got a $22 heat bill instead of a $200 heat bill. His house was set to about 50 degrees. He walked around in footy pajamas the entire time he was home. He never once jacked that heat up. Now I'm not recommending it, okay? It would suck. But if you have the option to, turn that thermostat down just a little bit. If you have the option to, turn it off at night. If you know, oh damn, we got hard economical times, buy everyone a sleeping bag. That sleeping bag is going to keep them warm a lot better than a single fitted sheet, or a lot better than comforter. Or you can combine, right? There's nothing that says you can't. Put 5, 6, 7, 8 blankets on the bed. Put your little daughter in bed with you. Put your son in bed with you. Pile up in the same room. Those little bits of savings will add up in the long run. Tip number 10. It's going to take time to adjust. Don't be so hard on yourself. We see this every single year. New Year's resolutions come around. People say, dude, I'm going to quit smoking. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to start a new diet. I'm going to save some money and have a new financial goal. And when January 1st hits, man, they are hardcore. Those gyms are packed. People are doing all new sorts of kind of diets. People are saving money like never before. Then what happens? 2, 3, 4 weeks in, they skip a few days in the gym. They eat a cheeseburger instead of what was on their diet plan. They splurge a little bit instead of saving money. They beat themselves up for it. Then they try to get back on that wagon again. And then maybe they fall off. Or maybe they keep going. We see this every single year. Do you think the people in 1929 had any clue what they were doing as compared to those same people in 1938, 1939? Absolutely not. They had a 10-year window where they were constantly learning, where they were constantly improving, where they were constantly getting better and figuring out what worked for them and what didn't work. It took them 10 years to get through the Great Depression. 10 years of learning, of hard learning. And some years were better than others. So let's say it happens again. You're not going to be an expert on day one. You're not going to be able to cut the power off, cut the lights off, quit your job and say, you know what, I am a professional at this. I don't need nobody's help. That's not how it works. Learn from your surrounding areas. People used to read in the magazines, people used to read the newspaper, people used to talk to one another and get tips, tricks, advice, ideas, skills, helping one another make it through this rough financial time. If it happens again, you're not going to be the same person at the beginning that you are at the end. Alright guys, again, this was 10 tips for the next Great Depression. Let me know if I forgot anything down below. Next week's video is going to be on 10 skills for the next Great Depression. Hope to see you there. That's all I got for today's video. Thank you for watching. Y'all take care.